How's it going, everybody? Welcome to We Do Hardware. Again, not We Do Tech anymore. So if you watched my previous video, I quickly went over that I had a channel called We Do Tech a while back. I sold it, took a hiatus for about a year or so, just to, I call it a tech detox, just to reset my mind a bit, because doing tech for what was probably almost 10 years, yeah, it does kind of take a toll on you. So I just needed to take a bit of a break. But at the same time, I actually sold the channel to somebody else. But I really started to miss doing tech again. So I decided, why not start back up again from scratch? Well, it wasn't supposed to be from scratch. I actually had a couple of channels with a couple of thousand subscribers, but then it got hacked like a couple of days ago. So yeah, definitely starting from scratch now. But luckily, we already did a video previously. You can, of course, go check that one out, where we did also do pretty much the exact same thing with a build showcase, benchmarking, and showing guys how this system performs. So if you want to see that one, that was with a Ryzen 7 7800X3D. I believe the new one is coming out quite soon, but this one is more of an Intel system now, but with the same GPU. So we're gonna go over everything and see how it performs and if it's worth actually getting if you are in the market. All right, so quickly before jumping into the system, I will say that it does have an i9 14900K. But just what, today or yesterday, whatever, the new Ultra 9 285K or 285K, whatever they're going to call it, came out as well. So unfortunately, I don't have that one yet. Hopefully I will, to actually compare it to this one. But it didn't perform as well as a lot of people hoped, apparently. So if you want to see how exactly that one performed, there are a couple of benchmarks out already, a couple of reviewers, so you can go watch those. But in a short, they got rid of multi-threading, so you don't have that anymore. So they did jump the Vcache up to 3 megs instead of 2 megs, but still not anywhere close to AMD's with their X3D range. And then also they dropped the power apparently by quite a lot. So if you are like I am currently, we run solar, we're completely off grid. So power-wise, that would be nice, but it's honestly not the biggest thing for me. I'd rather have more performance than reduced power, but at least you do have that. So in the end, it's kind of a mixed bag in performance as well in a gaming, and it was kind of on a par with the 14900K here, but it wasn't like crazy good or worth really upgrading to if you're only going to game. However, when it came to more workload applications, Blender, Cinebench, well, Cinebench not really, but more of the other production type of side of video editing, that is where the Ultra 9 2085K whatever actually performed quite a bit better. So you do have that as least. So just depending on what you're going to be your use case, gaming not really worth upgrading from a 14900K or even like a 13900K, honestly. But if you do edit a lot more or production work, 3D design, then maybe that CPU could be better. But anyway, let's quickly go over the 14900K here if you don't know already. So it's currently about 1 year old, so they replaced it with the new one, and I just wanted to see actually how it compared to my 13900K that I have in my personal system, and if it's worth upgrading to, or even later on to the new 285K whatever. Now it does have 24 cores and 32 threads. So if you have 8 performance cores and 16 efficient cores, that does a boost up to 6 gigahertz. But with that 6 gigahertz, you'll have to keep it quite cool. Otherwise, it's definitely going to downclock, which we did see as also. Now, as for power, it is a 125 watt TDP, but of course we did see higher than that. It does run on the LGA 1700 socket, same for the 14th generation and the 13th generation. So if you have the same board, you can use both of them. But for the new ones, those are on an entirely different socket now. Now, as for pricing, the 4900K here does retail for around $440 or 11,500 Rand for here in South Africa. As for the Ultra 9, that one is going for just under $600 or 13,000 Rand. So if you're only going to game, the 4900K here does look to be a bit of a better buy. Now also with the new ones coming out, I would hope to see that these ones also drop in price. So maybe on like Black Friday, which is what in a month or so, you could possibly get a nice combo deal with a motherboard, RAM, and then also the CPU at a nice discounted price. So we will see. But now moving on from our CPU, we have the Gigabyte Z790 Aero G motherboard. So this one is currently retailing for around $340 or 7,200 Rand. It does of course feature the LGA 1700 socket for both 13th generation and 14th. You have 4 DDR5 DIMM slots that has a max capacity of up to 256 gigs and speeds up to 7,600 megahertz or mega transfers per second. Along with everything, you do have a 19+1+1 phase power design at 105 amps, so it's definitely enough for the 4900K here. As for PCI Express slots, the top one is a PCI Express Gen 5 that does also share bandwidth with the top M.2, which we'll go over. So if both of them are occupied, it only runs at 8x speed, which is still enough, honestly, but just keep that in mind. Now for the bottom two, those ones are one PCI Express Gen 4 and the other one Gen 3. Both of them are running, I believe, at 8x speed, so also still enough for any of your expansion cards. Now as for our M.2s, you do have a 5 M.2 slots, so plenty of storage, with the top one being a Gen 5 as well. Again, sharing bandwidth between the PCI Express slot for your GPU and then also for the M.2. Now it's definitely going to be needed if you're running a Gen 5 SSD like we are, so we'll go over that a bit later. But for the others, all of the other 4 are generation 4 as well. Then just quickly for networking, you do of course get a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, and interestingly enough, this is the first time that I'm actually seeing this, that you get a swappable Wi-Fi card. You're usually seeing them in like laptops, but now instead of actually it being built in, you do have a separate one that you can upgrade later on. So that's actually pretty cool. Then moving towards our memory next, we do have a 32 gig kit, so 2 16 gig sticks of a G.Skill's RIP Jaws S5 that does run at 6,000 megahertz. So again, plenty speed there. Now these are also CL30, so nice and low timings, and it does run at 1.35 volts. Now as for pricing, they're not too expensive as well, going for around $100 on Amazon or Newegg. But as for here in South Africa, unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any stock, so some of the similar equivalent ones did go for around 6,000 Rand, but I believe those also were 5,600 and not 6,000, and also higher timings. Then moving towards our SSD, we have the Corsair MP700 Pro. So this one is again a Gen 5 SSD, so up to 12 gigabytes per second. Not that you're really going to need all of that speed, but you do have that as an option. All right, so you do currently get a terabyte and a 2 terabyte model, and I believe also a 4 terabyte if you really want to spend a lot of money. Now you do also get 3 different models, one of them being just the standalone PCB SSD, and then the other ones is the air-cooled, actually has like a fan with a heatsink on it. That's also a bit more expensive, and then also you do have a water-cooled one as well that you can use for your custom loop. The air-cooled one does stand out quite a bit, so just keep that in mind, but it looks pretty nice, and it's going to keep it nice and cool as well. All right, then next up, let's take a look at our GPU, because this one is the same one that I had in the AMD system in my previous video. So if you guys want to check that one out as well, see how both of the systems compete against each other, you can do that. But this is the Gigabyte RX 7900 GRE gaming OC. Now, like I mentioned in the previous video, I completely missed this entire range of GPUs, so I was glad to get this one in and actually test it out and see how it performed. But now, if you didn't know, this is more of the baby of the 7900 family. I'm calling it a baby, but instead of the 24 gigs or the 20 gigs that you had in the XT and the XTX model, you only get a measly 16 gigs, unfortunately. But now, as for our clock speeds, it does go up to 2391 megahertz. It does have a 256-bit memory bus. You have 4 I/O ports here at the back, 2 display ports, 2 HDMI ports, and it has a rated power draw of 260 watts, but we definitely did see more than that. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any of these in stock, especially new. On Newegg, I only saw some refurbished ones, and then also wasn't always in stock. So it ranged between like $500 to $600 at the launch. For MSRP, I believe it was $550. So it is slightly bit higher, or you can maybe get a refurbished one for slightly bit cheaper if you can actually find them. But for Yen South Africa, luckily there is still stock, ranging for around 12,500 Rand. Then next up, it's time for our case here. So this is the Cooler Master Master Box TD500 Mesh 2 version 2. So as you guys can see, it does look pretty nice. You do have the front mesh panel here that has that lets in a lot of air, but it's also not just a flat. It has like a polygonal, if that's a word, a fine mesh front panel, so it does let in a lot of air. Now for the side here, I took off the side panel, but you get a crystalline tempered glass side panel. Not exactly sure what the crystalline really is, but yeah, you do have that. It's fancy. You can brag about that to your friends. Now you do also have two different models. You get them in black and then also in a white. I think the white would have looked really nice with the rest of our white gear here. But anyway, you do have three included fans as well. The CF2 120mm ARGB fans, and of course you do get a plenty of space here. If you have one of the super long GPUs, thick ones, then there's still plenty of space here in the front. Now as for pricing, I'm actually quite surprised here. So it does go for around $100 on a Newegg, and for Yen South Africa it's actually cheaper. It's 1,600 Rand. Now currently the exchange rate is what, almost like 18 Rand, so 18 Rand for $1. So yeah, you save a bit of cash there. First time that I'm actually seeing that, so good job for Cool Master South Africa. Then next up we have our cooler here, which is also the Cooler Master Atmos 360 all-in-one. Now all of the new coolers comes with a screen, where this one doesn't. It's actually also quite a bit nice. I do actually like the design, but this is a 360mm all-in-one. You get it in black and then also white. Now like I said, there's no display on this one, but you do get this top cover that can actually remove, and then also 3D print your own ones to place on top of that. Cooler Master usually does these 3D modded things, so yeah, that's actually pretty cool to see. So if you have your own 3D printer, I do not, you can play around with that and design your own one. Now included with the AIO is three Sickle Flow Edge 120mm fans that has speeds up to 2,500 RPM and a CFM of 70. Then finally, for pricing, it does cost around $150 or 3,200 Rand, again for Yen South Africa. And then moving on towards our power supply, we do have the Corsair RM1000X, but it is a 1000 watt 80 plus gold fully modular power supply that does also have the zero fan mode. So if you don't use any power, it's not going to ramp up. And you do actually here at the back have a manual override knob. So if you want to manually put it to max, you can just twist it around here. Let's see, the other way around. Not sure if you guys can hear that, but it's spinning on its max now. So if you want to just ramp it up, you can if you wanted to. Now for power, now pricing wise, it does cost $190 or 4,700 Rand. But now with all of that out of the way, let's get into our benchmarks, and starting off with our CPU here. For Cinebench R23, we got a score of 39,369 for a multi-core and a 2,279. Now that is currently my fastest one that I tested so far. It's only slightly faster than the 13900K, so yeah, it's not really worth upgrading for that. For Cinebench R24, this is a completely new benchmark for me. I only was able to test it on the 7800X3D, but this one was quite a bit faster with a score of 2,247 for multi-core and 136 for single core. Now unfortunately, those was the only two I was able to test so far. I'll see if I can actually get the 3900K as well, but later on I'll be able to get more systems in and benchmark it and add towards the database for all of the benchmarks. I did also do a quick Crystal Diskmark bench for our SSD here, and it scored a whopping 11,648 megabytes per second in reads and 9,457 megabytes per second in writes. So yeah, by far the fastest one that I've tested till date. All of the previous SSDs that I tested before was generation 4. So and I think the max was about 7,000, but yeah, it's quite fast. All right, before we get into all of the gaming benchmarks, let's quickly go over the cooling and then also the power draw. So for cooling on games for the CPU, which did see an average of 60 degrees out of that 5.6 gigahertz. It did sometimes boost up to 6 gigahertz. Now for TimeSpy's CPU test, we did actually see it go quite a bit high, just below 90 degrees. And once hitting those levels, a lot of times TimeSpy actually crashed as well. So it definitely went quite a bit high. Now, as for our GPU, we usually saw around 70 degrees in our games and also 70% fan speed or 3000 RPM, but it did sometimes spike to 80% or 3600 RPM and also a slight bit higher, but it never really went above 80 degrees because then usually the fans ramp up a bit more or it could downclock, but I didn't really see that in any of my testing. All right, so finally we can get into all of our gaming benchmarks. Now I did of course test it in 1080p, 1440p, and then also in 4K to see exactly how the system would perform, and pretty much all of the games were set on its ultra preset. There was only 1 or 2 games that I lowered slightly a bit to like very high instead of ultra, but pretty much everything else ultra or max settings, and we tested a frame FSR and also frame generation as well. All right, so starting with our first batch of 1080p games, we saw that it was only really Black Myth Wukong on a very high preset that fell below like 100 frames a second. Everything else was decently high. It was only also like Alan Wake 2 that was slightly bit lower than 100 frames, but everything else did really well here. Again, everything on ultra presets, and then especially if you enable like frame generation and FSR, it does boost the frames quite a bit more. And for our second batch here, we didn't see anything below 100 frames a second. It was Horizon Forbidden West, again on very high settings. That was the lowest at 113 frames. And looking at God of War with FSR on balance and also frame gen on, you got around 330 frames a second. And of course, Rainbow Six Siege with FSR on balance, we saw almost 500 frames. So no worries for frames there. Then next up for 1440p, it was also again a Black Myth Wukong that was the lowest here at 57 frames, so just below that 60 frames a second mark, but everything else was again closer to 100, and it was Ghost of Tsushima with a very high preset and also FSR and frame gen on that reached to around 200 frames a second. Cyberpunk, even without FSR, was able to reach just below 100 frames a second, so no worries there also. Then for our second batch of 1440p games, we did see it a bit lower here with Star Wars and also Horizon Forbidden West just below the 90 FPS mark. But of course, when enabling FSR, it does boost it a bit, going up to 125 frames a second for Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and also for Horizon Forbidden West going up to 111 frames. Then getting into our 4K benchmarks, here we can see unfortunately the frames did drop a bit lower, but still very close to that 60 frames a second mark for the majority of the games. Now you will have to enable FSR and also frame gen on a lot of them, but you do get that to 4K 60 frames a second. So that is very nice. It was unlike Alan Wake 2, Black Myth Wukong, and also Ghost of Tsushima and Cyberpunk, everything on ultra or very high that we saw that below 60 frames a second. For our second batch, it was actually only just Star Wars Jedi Survivor and also again Horizon Forbidden West that fell below 60 frames a second without any FSR enabling. So if you enable that, it does boost it quite a bit more to around the 80s to 70 frames a second, and everything else was again quite a bit higher. God of War Ragnarok went all the way from 72 frames to 111 frames to 168 frames. And of course, Rainbow Six Siege way up there at 235 frames a second. So if you were in the market for a 4K 120Hz monitor, the system will be able to handle that completely fine. You'll just have to enable some of the FSR and frame generation, but yeah, you'll be able to play 4K 120 frames for a lot of games. Now, unfortunately, I won't do that. Now, unfortunately, for this video, I won't do a comparison between the 7800 X3D and also the 4900K here. But it was interesting to see that the R7 7800 X3D was slightly faster than the 14900K here. So a lot less cores, was 8 cores and 16 threads compared to the 24 cores and also 32 threads. Was actually the AMD was faster. That was of course thanks to the 3D V cache on the AMD CPU. So for gaming, you do have the options between the 7800 X3D or the 4900K, but if you're doing a bit more than just gaming, the 4900K here is a lot faster and more production work, 3D rendering of video editing and so on than the 7800 X3D. So it's probably just going to depend up to your workload and also at what price point you can actually get them at. The new, the 9800 X3D is coming out apparently like next month, and now with the new Ultra range being out as well. So we'll see how the prices drop. Hopefully they do drop for the 4900K here and also the 7800 X3D, so you guys can have a better option of which one you would like to go for. So yeah, that is pretty much it. If you guys want to build a system like this as well, I will leave all of the parts linked in the description below. You can mix and match some of the parts as well if you want to get a different cooler, a different motherboard. But I believe this is actually a pretty nice balanced setup, or higher end gaming setup. So you can maybe just, I don't know, I don't really think there's anything that needs to be replaced. You can possibly go for a lower power supply, like 850 watt. That's honestly pretty much it. The case is affordable, the cooler is affordable with good performance. The GPU, the CPU, the RAM, SSD, you could maybe go for like a generation 4 instead of a 5. So the MP600 from Corsair is also there. So yeah, that's pretty much it, honestly. But anyway, I do hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Like always, I usually say that in with my old channel, but I do hope you guys really enjoy these videos. If you have any ideas for anything else you would like me to do, again, for the hardware overload channel, everything is going to be more PC focused, PC builds, PC benchmarks, all of the internal components, all of that, cooling numbers, power numbers, all of that. But for now, it's just some system showcases and benchmarks, so you guys can see if you want to get something similar or just to see how it actually performs. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll take all of you next time. Cheers, guys.